Meet Jack Tanner, a burnt-out ex-Navy pilot who avoided danger at all costs after a career-ending crash. Now, he flies a small plane to tiny Pacific islands until a family's desperate SOS in a raging storm changes everything. Hours later, his small bush plane is skidding across a massive aircraft carrier deck, brakes screaming, nose teetering over the edge above churning waves. No Navy pilot would attempt this landing, but Jack has no choice. Hi, everyone. Let's get started. The morning had started like any other for Jack. At 49, his days followed a predictable pattern: pre-flight check, cargo loading, island hopping across the Pacific, delivering mail and supplies to communities too small for the big cargo companies to bother with. It wasn't glamorous work, but that's exactly why he'd chosen it. After what happened on the USS Valiant 15 years ago, glamour was the last thing Jack Tanner wanted. He moved methodically around his plane, a Pilatus PC-6 Porter, checking the control surfaces with a practiced eye. It wasn't exactly pretty, he thought, but it could land on patches of dirt smaller than most suburban driveways. For island work, nothing beat it. "She's looking good today," called Rico, the mechanic who kept the small fleet running at Pacific Island Air Services. Jack nodded, running his hand along the sturdy wing. "Oil consumption's up a bit on the starboard side," he murmured. Rico grinned. "You and that bird, man. You notice things before my gauge does." Jack didn't respond. His connection to aircraft was something he didn't talk about. When you spend thousands of hours in the cockpit, planes start speaking to you in their own language. Every vibration, every change in engine pitch tells a story. The small bush plane was telling him she was ready to fly, despite the minor oil issue. The loading crew finished stacking mail bags and supply boxes, securing them with cargo nets. Jack signed the manifest without really looking at it. Tuesday meant the northern route. 6 islands, 11 stops, home by sunset, if the weather held. The aircraft lifted off easily, quickly climbing to 3,000 FT. Jack banked east. The rising sun warmed the cockpit. Below, the deep blue of the Pacific stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional white sand atoll or verdant volcanic island. This was why he still flew, despite everything. Up here, the past couldn't touch him. No memories of screaming metal or burning jet fuel, no replay of his wingman's FA-18. Cartwheeling into the sea after Jack's botched landing caused a deck collision. No faces of the inquiry board telling him that while he wasn't officially responsible, his career in naval aviation was over. Up here he was just a pilot and his plane. Everything else fell away. Jack completed his first 3 stops without incident. At the 4th, a tiny medical outpost on Tamatoa Island, he helped unload supplies while the local kids clustered around his aircraft, touching its wheels with reverent hands. "Mr. Hawk! Mr. Hawk!" they called, using the nickname that had somehow spread throughout the islands. "You bring us candy?" Jack reached into his pocket for the roll of mints he always carried. The children squealed with delight as he handed them out, 1 per kid. "Next week," a small boy named Kayla said solemnly, "you bring chocolate?" Jack ruffled the boy's hair. "If you're good." It was the closest thing to joy he allowed himself these days. These brief connections before climbing back into the Porter and returning to the solitude of the sky. By midday, Jack was halfway through his route, skimming just 2,000 FT above the ocean. The weather report had mentioned a storm system developing to the southeast, but his planned course should keep him well clear of it. He'd been flying this route for 7 years now, and weather rarely surprised him anymore. His emergency radio crackled, an unusual occurrence this far from any major communications center. Jack reached for the dial, adjusting the frequency to clear up the static. "Anyone? Position 14? Taking water?" The transmission cut in and out, nearly unintelligible. Jack frowned, adjusting his heading slightly to improve reception. Emergency calls out here usually meant a fishing boat with engine trouble, or a yacht that had strayed too far from established routes. "This is Pacific Island Air Services, Flight 18. I'm picking up your distress call, but the signal is weak. Please repeat location and nature of emergency." For several moments, only static answered him. Then, a voice broke through, stronger this time. "This is the Wanderer, pleasure craft out of Honolulu. We've struck a reef and are taking on water. Storm conditions deteriorating rapidly. 2 adults, 2 children on board." Jack checked his GPS. Based on the coordinates coming through, the vessel was nearly 200 miles southeast of his position, directly in the path of the developing storm. "Wanderer, are you in contact with Coast Guard services?" "Negative. Our satellite phone washed overboard. Radio damaged in the impact. Using emergency backup battery nearly depleted." The transmission crackled, and a new voice came through, higher, younger. "Please help us. My brother's really scared." A girl's voice, probably teenage. Then another voice, this one smaller, clearly a young boy trying not to cry. "The water's coming in really fast." Jack felt something twist in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. These weren't just faceless coordinates on a map. These were kids, scared and in danger. "Wanderer, what's your current situation? Are you still aboard your vessel?" "Negative. Vessel sinking. We've deployed life raft. Current position approximately 14°30' north, 162°47' west. Wave height 25 to 30 F to winds." The transmission cut off abruptly. Jack tried repeatedly to re-establish contact, but the radio remained silent. The battery had likely died, or worse. The life raft had been swamped by the massive waves the man had described. Jack ran the mental calculations he'd been trained to do since his Navy days. The Wanderer's family was 200 miles away, in deteriorating condition. The nearest Coast Guard station was on Guam, nearly 400 miles from their position. Even if he could somehow contact them, their helicopters would be pushing their operational range and might not even launch, given the storm conditions. He checked his fuel gauges, 3/4 full. The Porter had a range of about 600 nautical miles on a full tank, enough to divert to the vessel's last known position. And then, where? Jack pulled out his charts, spreading them across his lap while keeping the Porter steady with practiced ease. There were no islands within safe range. If he diverted to the life raft, the only possible landing site would be... He froze, staring at the chart. The USS Valiant, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, was conducting training exercises in the region. Based on its last known position and typical movement patterns, it would be approximately 150 miles northwest of the Wanderer's position. The very ship he'd crashed on 15 years ago, the same carrier where his best friend had died because of his mistake. Jack's hands tightened on the controls. He could try to relay the distress call, but his civilian radio lacked the power to reach either the Coast Guard or the Valiant from his current position. VHF radio was essentially line of sight, useful for maybe 50 miles at his altitude. No one would hear his call. He had a choice to make, and only minutes to make it. Continue his route, hoping someone else would somehow receive the wanderer's dying transmission, or fly into a worsening storm to find a family who might already be dead, with no clear plan for what he'd do if he found them alive. The boy's voice echoed in his mind. "The water's coming in really fast!" Jack banked the plane sharply to the southeast and pushed the throttle forward. The sudden course change would raise questions back at base when he missed his next scheduled stop. But that couldn't be helped. What he was about to attempt was either an act of remarkable courage or stunning stupidity. Maybe both. Either way, those kids deserve someone trying to save them, even if that someone was a washed-up Navy pilot with more regrets than the achievements to his name. As the aircraft's nose pointed toward the darkening horizon, Jack had no way of knowing he was flying toward a moment that would force him to confront every ghost that had haunted him for the past 15 years. The storm appeared on the horizon, like a dark wall rising from the sea. Jack had encountered plenty of bad weather in his years of flying, but this system looked serious. Towering thunderheads reaching up to 30,000 FT, with the classic anvil shape of strong convection. "You flown through worse," he muttered to himself, though he wasn't entirely convinced that was true. As the porter entered the outer bands of the storm, the first raindrops pelted the windshield. Within minutes, it was as if someone was throwing buckets of water against the glass. The small aircraft began to buck and heave as turbulence grabbed it. Jack fought the controls, keeping the porter level through instinct and experience. The Pilatus was built for this kind of punishment, designed to operate in the world's harshest environments, but even the toughest bush plane had its limits. He glanced at his GPS, confirming he was on course for the Wanderer's last reported position. According to his calculations, he should reach them in approximately 45 minutes, if the headwinds didn't slow him down too much, and if the life raft hadn't drifted significantly. Finding a small raft in these conditions would be like spotting a cork in a washing machine. The chances of success were slim at best, but Jack had long ago learned that slim chances were better than none. The porter dropped suddenly, losing nearly 500 FT of altitude before Jack could arrest the descent. His stomach lurched as the plane stabilized. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he could see the ocean's surface had transformed into a chaotic landscape of swells and whitecaps. 2-foot waves, Jack said aloud, reassessing the Wanderer's final transmission. If anything, they were understating it. For the next 30 minutes, Jack focused entirely on keeping the porter airborne while navigating toward the coordinates. The storm intensified, lightning flashing around him, illuminating the cockpit in brief ghostly bursts. A thin layer of frost appeared on the edges of the windshield. Not enough to be dangerous yet, but worth watching carefully. As he reached the approximate location, Jack reduced altitude to get a better view of the surface, though it meant subjecting his plane to even more violent turbulence. At 1,000 hours FT, visibility was limited to perhaps half a mile through the rain and spray. He began a search pattern, expanding outward from the last known coordinates. The small aircraft shuddered continuously now, the control yoke vibrating in his hands. Rain and ocean seemed to blend together, creating a disorienting gray world where up and down lost their meaning. On his third search leg, a flash of orange caught his eye, so brief he thought he might have imagined it. Jack banked hard, circling back around, straining to see through the deluge. There it was again, an orange life raft, rising momentarily to the crest of a massive wave before disappearing into the trough. Jack's pulse quickened. He'd found them. Against all odds. He dropped lower, ignoring his aircraft's protests, as he descended to 500 FT. Now he could see the raft clearly during the moments it rose on the wave. 4 figures were huddled inside, clinging to each other as the tiny vessel was tossed about like a toy. They were alive, but for how much longer in these conditions? Jack keyed his microphone, even though he knew the chances of them having a working radio were virtually 0. "Wanderer survivors, this is aircraft overhead. Can you hear me?" No response, as expected. Jack needed to let them know help was coming. But more importantly, he needed to mark their position precisely. He reached behind his seat, grabbing the emergency kit. Inside were 2 handheld flares and a small waterproof GPS beacon. Jack quickly activated the beacon, setting it to transmit the current coordinates continuously. Banking around for another pass, Jack opened his side window, the wind and rain immediately lashing his face. As the porter passed over the life raft, he tossed out the beacon, followed by one of the flares. Both landed within feet of the raft, the flare igniting with a bright red glow. Despite the rain, he saw movement below. One of the adults, looking up, waving frantically. They'd seen him. They knew someone had found them, but seeing them was one thing, saving them was another matter entirely. Jack checked his fuel gauge. He'd burned through more than expected fighting the headwinds. He had enough to reach the USS Valiant's last known position, but it would be close. Too close for comfort. The Valiant was their only hope. Its helicopters could reach the life raft and effect a rescue, but only if they knew exactly where to look. Jack's small GPS beacon might help, but in these conditions, its signal could easily be lost. What the Navy needed was eyes on target. Someone who could provide exact coordinates and confirmation of survivors. Someone who could guide the rescue helicopters to the precise location. Someone like him. Jack took one last look at the life raft, committing its position to memory. Then he turned his aircraft northwest, toward the USS Valiant, toward his past, toward his redemption or his doom. What waited for him on that carrier deck wasn't just a difficult landing. It was 15 years of ghosts he'd been running from. But right now, 4 lives depended on him, facing those ghosts head-on. As the porter broke free of the storm's worst section, Jack tried his radio again. After a moment's hesitation, he flipped to an old Navy frequency he wasn't supposed to remember. One of many details from his military life he'd never quite managed to forget. USS Valiant, this is civilian aircraft Papa Charlie 6, inbound with emergency information. Do you copy? Static answered him. He was still too far away, the storm interfering with transmission. He'd have to get closer, much closer, before they'd hear him. Jack settled in for the flight, his mind already working through the problems ahead. The Valiant's deck would be moving in the swells. The porter had no tail hook to catch the arresting wires. He'd have one chance, one to put the plane down safely, and if he couldn't, well, that family in the life raft would never know he'd tried to save them. They'd simply wait for rescue until the sea eventually claimed them, adding 4 more ghosts to haunt the waters of the Pacific. Jack's jaw tightened. "Not today," he promised, though no one was there to hear it. "Not on my watch." The porter pushed on through rain and cloud, carrying its pilot toward a confrontation 15 years in the making. An hour later, Jack caught his first glimpse of the USS Valiant. The massive aircraft carrier appeared through a break in the clouds, its gray hull distinct against the dark ocean. Even from miles away, Jack could see the deck was in motion, rising and falling with the swells. He'd been trying his radio every 5 minutes, and now, finally within range, he might have a chance of being heard. USS Valiant? This is civilian aircraft Papa Charlie 6 with emergency information regarding survivors at sea. Request immediate response. For several tense seconds, there was nothing. Then the radio crackled to life. Unidentified aircraft, this is USS Valiant. You are approaching restricted. Military operations. Alter course immediately. The voice was clipped, professional, unwelcoming. Valiant. I have visual confirmation.